The day I realized my son wanted me to disappear was not when everything happened, but when he stood in front of his mother's coffin and looked at me with the eyes of someone weighing an option. He lowered his head and whispered to his wife a line that sounded almost casual. If the old man died early, it would save us a lot of trouble. I heard it, right there at my wife's funeral, while the earth had not yet fully covered the lid of the coffin. The shock was not in the cruelty of the words, but in the way they were spoken, calm, natural, as if my death had already been slotted neatly into their schedule. And I knew it was not a slip, because when Nathan turned back, his eyes did not carry the grief of a son who had just lost his mother, but the gaze of someone calculating cold and without hesitation. It all began with a sum of money, large enough to turn my life into a solution. If you have ever felt a chill just thinking about the word family, leave me a... and tell me where you are listening to this story from, just so I know someone understands. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a house is the person you trust the most. Seattle that day was raining in the way only this city can. Soft, relentless, not heavy enough to wash the sorrow away, yet not light enough to ignore. Rain pooled on the cold granite of the headstone, running down the name I had looked at for more than 4 decades, now carved into stone. Eleanor Calder. I stood there, both hands gripping the edge of my black coat, feeling as if I were still wearing a uniform. Except this time there was no clear mission, no map, no orders, only a dark wooden coffin and a clod of cold earth waiting to fall. I was 64 years old. People called me a veteran, which sounded more impressive than the reality. A retired old man whose back started to ache when the weather turned cold, whose knees clicked on the stairs, but in front of Eleanor I always felt like the young soldier I once was. And now I was just a man standing beside his wife's grave. The priest's voice droned on ahead, words of comfort that never reached me. The smell of wet earth, white lilies, and expensive perfume from the mourners mixed into something suffocating. I looked at my hands, hands that had once held a rifle, that had built this house, installed every kitchen cabinet, painted every wall for Eleanor, and suddenly they felt useless. To my left, Nathan and Sabrina stood close together. My son wore an expensive black suit, tie perfectly knotted, head bowed at just the right angle of a grieving son. Sabrina held a tissue, dabbing at the corners of her eyes like a Kleenex commercial. To outsiders, they looked like a model couple, dutiful and devoted. If he weren't my son, I might have believed it too. People filed past to lay flowers, shake my hand, say the familiar lines. "You're so strong." She was a wonderful woman. "You were together so long. It's admirable." I nodded, thanked them, repeated thank you, like an old machine stuck on one function. When an elderly couple embraced me, I heard Nathan respond perfectly nearby. "Dad's trying to hold on, but it's hard." Mom was his whole world. It sounded convincing, just a little too smooth, like the voice of an insurance salesman. The formal service ended. People drifted away, some toward their cars, some into quiet clusters. I stayed there, staring at the open grave, as if looking long enough might make someone step forward and say, "It's just a mistake. Open it back up. Bring her home." Nathan patted my shoulder gently. "Dad, do you want to head home now, or stay a bit longer?" His voice was warm, kind, exactly the son any father would want. I turned to answer, but another group approached and pulled Nathan and Sabrina aside to exchange condolences. They were drawn a few steps away, near a small tent by the tree line. I faced the grave again and only caught fragments carried back by the wind. Sabrina's voice, very soft, but clear enough, so the old soldier finally broke. A chill ran down my spine, even through the thick coat. Nathan chuckled, a sound with none of the grief he'd just performed. "Yeah, once he signs, it's done. No more babysitting." Babysitting? I stood close enough, my back turned. They thought I couldn't hear. In their eyes, I was a deaf old man, half gone. They forgot I once lived in bunkers listening for enemy boots at a distance. Sabrina continued, I just hope he doesn't change his mind. I can't handle a few more months cleaning up after him and listening to war stories. Nathan replied, irritation slipping through the restraint. 30 years is enough. He signs, we sell the house, clear the debts, and move on. How long's the old man got left anyway? I heard enough to lose the ability to comfort myself. This wasn't ingratitude. It was a calculation. Cold, dry, no trembling hands. I glanced their way. When someone else came near, Nathan instantly reset his face, draped a flawless sadness over it, put an arm around Sabrina, and nodded along. If I hadn't heard them, I would have believed the act. I taught Nathan how to tie his shoes, how to throw a ball, and how to drive. I never taught him how to lie this well. A hand settled on my arm, firm and warm, but not familiar. I turned to see Grant Holloway, the man Eleanor had worked with for nearly 2 decades, her senior colleague and the founder and CEO of Holloway Global Logistics. Grant was tall, evenly gray-haired, his dark gray suit tailored to the millimeter. He was the kind of man who didn't need an introduction. Rooms adjusted to him. Eleanor used to say, he's demanding, but fair. Even harder on money than on people. Harrison, sorry, Tom, Grant corrected himself, voice low and steady. I'm very sorry. I nodded and forced out words. Thank you, Grant. The flowers, they're beautiful. Eleanor would have liked them. She deserved more than flowers, he said, eyes fixed on Eleanor's grave. There was something there beyond courtesy. I saw him swallow, as if weighing words. I expected a story about Eleanor at work, how she kept the books, saved the company from some audit season, the kind of stories people tell at funerals to soften the grief. Grant didn't. He lowered his voice, just enough for me, like men talking in a trench. When you're ready, Tom, come to my office. Eleanor left you something? I frowned. Left me something? You mean a company will or documents? Grant shook his head slightly, eyes still on the headstone. Not the kind of paperwork you're thinking of. This is personal. And Tom, he turned fully toward me now, his gaze sharper, heavier. Don't say a word to Nathan about this, especially not to Sabrina. It felt like a handful of ice dropped into my stomach. I was a soldier. I knew the difference between a suggestion and an order. That wasn't a suggestion. Why? I asked, my own voice rough and tired. He's my son. I know, Grant said, without a trace of irony, and that may be the problem. He squeezed my arm once and let go, as if any more would be too much. Tomorrow afternoon, if you can make it, come to Holloway Tower. I'll be waiting. Grant walked away, leaving me in the rain. His back carried the weight of someone used to making hard decisions. I found myself believing that whatever Eleanor had left was no small thing. The sound of shovels broke the moment behind me. They began filling the grave. I watched the first clump of wet earth hit the coffin lid, mud splashing against the wood. In moments, what remained of Eleanor, her gray hair, her laughter, our morning coffee rituals, was slowly covered by nameless soil. I turned and looked toward Nathan. He was chatting with a young couple, likely Sabrina's colleagues. His face showed exactly what was expected. Grief, restraint, maturity. When my eyes met his, he looked back. For an instant, the emotional mask shifted. The sadness slipped like poorly glued latex, revealing something underneath, cold, calculating, tired of pretending. I realized I was looking into eyes that felt familiar, but not my son's. That was the first time, in a rain-soaked Seattle cemetery, that a strange certainty settled in me. The man standing a few dozen steps away carried the Calder name and the Calder face, but he wasn't the Nathan I had raised for more than 30 years. And like every time before a battle long ago, an old voice in my head whispered, "Something's wrong, Tom, and this time the front line runs straight through your family." Seattle afternoons carry a particular shade of gray, the kind that makes it hard to tell whether it's sunset or just a tired sky. When I returned to the wooden house overlooking Elliott Bay, the rain had eased, leaving droplets lined along the railing like soldiers at attention awaiting orders. I built this house with my own hands, every beam and window frame bearing the marks of more than 40 years with Eleanor. Now, stepping inside felt like entering an abandoned base. Nathan was in the kitchen with his back to me, chopping vegetables with unnecessary precision, while Sabrina stacked dishes with irritation disguised as politeness. Nathan spoke before I could hang my coat. "You were gone a long time, Dad." Sabrina glanced over her shoulder with a smile that barely lifted her lips. "Standing in the rain at your age isn't good for you." I let it pass, even though it sounded exactly like a reminder that I had become a burden. Nathan pulled a blue folder from a drawer and placed it on the walnut table I had carefully built for Eleanor. The words, "Power of Attorney, Full Authority," were clear in the corner. "Sign it, Dad. Just a formality. Mom handled everything, and now it's hard for you to manage. We just want to help." His voice was gentle, but his eyes were measuring, weighing, calculating. Sabrina added, "No one wants to see you overwhelmed at your age. Banks, insurance, paperwork, it's complicated." I rested my hand on the cold folder, and the hospital rushed back at me like sudden incoming fire. Eleanor lying in that bed, skin pale, eyes ringed dark, a nurse on shift frowning at lab results before looking at me and saying, "These numbers don't add up. If it were me, I'd ask for a tox screen." I had been about to call the doctor when Nathan stepped in, pulled him aside, said Eleanor was reading nonsense online, getting confused, and there was no need for toxicology. The doctor came back and said, "No need, just age-related issues." I believed it. That was my first mistake. Nathan dragged me back to the present by sliding the folder closer to my hand. "Dad, sign it. Don't make this harder." I looked at my son for a long time. This face had once belonged to the boy I taught to swim, to throw a ball, to read the wind. Today he sat across from me like someone else entirely, patient but subtly aggressive. Sabrina stood beside him, impatience burning in her eyes as if waiting for a signal to move to the next step of a plan I hadn't fully seen. I took a long breath, the same breath I used to take before live fire drills, pushed the folder back toward Nathan and said, keeping my voice steady, "I want one night to think." Sabrina opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand to stop her. "A soldier always needs time before a battle. Tomorrow I'll give you my answer." Nathan studied me, lips pressed tight. No anger, only calculation. Finally he nodded. "One night, just one." They thought I needed time to accept that I was old, weak, and no longer capable of deciding for myself. What I actually needed wasn't time to sign papers. I needed time to revisit every sign, every word, every look, and to understand that Eleanor didn't die naturally. Marissa's warning wasn't unfounded fear. Today I had heard enough, seen enough, felt enough to know I wasn't just standing in grief for my wife. I was standing on the edge of a battle. And this time, the enemy wasn't somewhere far away. It was right here in my kitchen. I was the last old soldier left in this story, and I would not overlook another sign. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist, focused on revenge stories for an American audience, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph, with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. Seattle nights always have their own way of whispering, wind slipping through roof seams, rain tapping a quiet rhythm against the windows, and long stretches of silence that seem to stretch time itself. I sat in my study, the soft yellow desk lamp falling over the blue folder, still lying untouched on the table as if watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The clock was nearing midnight when footsteps echoed down from above the garage, steps not meant to be hidden, heavy and rushed, the kind made by people who believe the house belongs only to them, and one tired old man who can't hear anything anymore. but I heard everything. The wooden walls of this house carry sound better than they think. Nathan spoke first, his voice lowered, but each word pressed tight with certainty. "He'll sign tomorrow. No problem," Sabrina answered, her voice light but sharp as a blade. $8 million. Finally. They went quiet for a beat, like swallowing something sweet and poisonous at the same time. Then Sabrina again, unmistakably pleased. "I told you. At his age, it's easy. Tired, lost his wife, confused. He just wants it over with." Nathan gave a short laugh. "The old soldier, he's not a soldier anymore." I closed my eyes for a moment, not in pain, but because a familiar cold ran down my spine, the kind that only ever came during missions I knew I had to escape alive. My phone vibrated at that exact moment. Grant Holloway's name lit the screen. I answered. "Tom." His voice was low, stretched tight as a bow pulled to its limit. "You need to come see me. Now. Don't wait until morning." I kept my voice steady. "What's going on?" "It's about Eleanor." He paused, then spoke even quieter. "And about your children. Don't let them know you're leaving." The line went dead. No goodbye, no hesitation. I stood immediately. Military training never leaves you. It just lies dormant, waiting. The first rule is to listen. Nathan and Sabrina were still above the garage, their voices fading, clearly convinced I couldn't leave the house without going through the front door. I flicked on the downstairs bedroom light for a second, then shut it off, planting a false trail of movement. Then I went down to the basement, the only place with a window opening onto the back of the property, the darkest area. I replayed the house layout in my head, marking the angles of the security cameras Nathan had installed 2 months earlier. They thought I didn't notice, but I memorized every placement. There were cameras around the house, but not full coverage. The last one faced the backyard, partially blocked by the roofline. I needed to hit the blind spot of all three. I moved carefully, shifting my weight the way the Army taught me, toes touching down first so the boards wouldn't creak. When I reached the basement, I killed the lights using the auxiliary switch. The room dropped into darkness. I cracked open the low window, cold air spilling across my face. Before climbing out, I caught Nathan's voice again from above. "Tomorrow morning, we'll clean it up. No more missed chances." "What if he gets suspicious?" Sabrina asked. Nathan replied in a voice I had never heard from my son. "He's not young enough to be suspicious anymore. They truly believed I had weakened beyond self-defense. A fatal miscalculation." I slipped out through the basement window, lowering myself onto wet ground without a sound. The smell of damp earth, rain, metal, and wind-beaten pine needles brought back memories of night ambushes long ago. My body shifted naturally into tactical mode, as if the last 30 years had only been an intermission. I followed the back garden line, kept close to the fence, moving toward the narrow alley leading to the main road. When I cleared the property, I looked back at the house, a fortress I had built for my family, now enemy territory. At the corner, I called a rideshare. The driver didn't ask questions when I climbed into the back seat, leaves clinging to my coat. I only said, "Holloway Tower," as fast as you can. The car pulled away. Seattle streetlights streaked across the window like endless lines of light. The battle had officially begun. And tonight, I was no longer a 64-year-old man. I was the last soldier Eleanor had left, and I would find the truth. I had never been more certain of anything in my life than I was as the car turned toward Holloway Tower. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist, focused on revenge stories for an American audience, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. Holloway Tower at midnight carried a strange kind of beauty. Its dark glass reflected the rain-soaked city of Seattle and the long stretches of yellow light, like a sea of stars worn down by Pacific Northwest weather. I stepped into the lobby, water dripping from my coat onto the granite floor, and the night security guard recognized me immediately. Mr. Calder, Mr. Holloway is waiting on the 28th floor. There was no surprise in his voice. Clearly, Grant had prepared everything. The elevator arrived the moment my eyes met it, the doors sliding open in silence as if guided by instinct. When I entered Grant's office, he was not alone. Beside him stood a man in his 60s, lean but solid, gray eyes cold as they studied me as if looking through my chest. Grant said, "Tom, this is Elias Morgan, private investigator. Eleanor hired him 6 months ago. 6 months. It felt like someone had slammed a fist into my chest. 6 months ago, Eleanor began looking pale, exhausted, and saying it was probably just age." Elias gave me a slight nod and spoke, his voice rough from too many conversations held in the dark. "Eleanor suspected your son, not something small. Theft." I stood still. Elias continued. "She discovered large sums disappearing from the joint account. At first, she thought it was a bank error. Then she traced it. The withdrawals were Nathan's." Grant cut in, bitterness in his voice, "Not just the family account. He tried to breach my company's financial system. Eleanor caught him. She threatened to go to the police. Elias pulled out a thick envelope and placed it in front of me, and then she received threats. I opened it. Grainy photos spilled out. An unfamiliar car parked outside my house. A man with a neck tattoo watching my front door. A handwritten note tucked under the wiper of Eleanor's Prius that read, "Pay or worse will come," Elias said quietly. "Loan sharks, high-interest lenders out of Tacoma. Nathan owes them $8 million. The room seemed to shrink around me, but Elias was not finished. He pulled out another file from a lab I did not recognize. Eleanor secretly requested toxicology tests at an outside lab. She was afraid the hospital had been compromised by Nathan. Grant looked at me, pain heavy in his eyes. "She kept it secret to protect you." I looked down at the report. The words struck like bullets. "Results indicate long-term accumulation of poison and anticoagulants in Eleanor's body, levels high enough to cause neurological decline, blood thinning, and gradual organ failure. Everything Eleanor had suffered piece by piece. Not age, not chronic illness, a deliberate, silent attack." Elias placed another file on the table. "And this is a video." The laptop screen lit up. Night footage, a rain-slick alley, flickering neon. In the frame stood Sabrina. Not the gentle, composed Sabrina from the funeral, but Sabrina in a hoodie, handing a small black package to an unfamiliar man. He passed her a dark glass bottle and took a small stack of cash. Elias's voice stayed level. "We followed the law. Eleanor hired me. I registered for public surveillance. The footage is legal." Grant crossed his arms, jaw tight. Eleanor suspected early. But every time she asked for toxicology at the hospital, Nathan stepped in and said she was paranoid. Elias looked at me. Marissa Colborn, the nurse at the hospital, also reported that Eleanor's numbers didn't make sense. But Nathan convinced the doctor she was confused, reading garbage online, panicking. I remembered that day clearly. Marissa was standing at the foot of the bed, warning in her eyes that I had not been sharp enough to understand. Elias closed the laptop and looked straight at me, his gaze sharp as a blade cutting through night fog. "Tom, you don't have much time." I swallowed a breath heavy as stone. Elias continued. "Those two don't just want the money. They need you gone. And afterward, they'll write the story their way." I sat down, my mind snapping back to old tactical briefings, commanders pointing at maps with thick black lines and saying, "This is where we live or die." Elias stood and walked to the window, staring down at the rain-soaked city. "We don't just need evidence. We need to catch them in the act, while Nathan and Sabrina are poisoning you." I looked up. "You want me as bait?" Elias turned back and nodded slowly. "Not just bait, Tom. You're the only witness Eleanor left, and we have to force them to show their true faces before you become the second victim." In that moment, I understood this was no longer a family matter, no longer about grief. This was a new battlefield. And this time, Eleanor had left me more than memories. She left me a mission, and I have never walked away from a mission in my life. I confirm my role as an American English translation specialist focused on revenge stories for an American audience, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. Seattle was soaked in early morning rain when I entered the secret meeting room beneath Holloway Tower. No windows, no natural light, only the smell of fresh paper, strong black coffee, and faces looking at me as if I were the final, critical piece of an operation with everything riding on it. Grant stood to one side. Elias Morgan was laying documents across the table, and at the head of it sat a woman I had never met, but instantly understood I had to listen to. Nina Ramirez, a criminal defense attorney, eyes sharp and voice carrying the weight of a closing door in an interrogation room. "Mr. Calder," she began, pulling out a chair for me, "from this moment on, you are no longer just a victim. You are the key." I sat down, the feeling identical to a pre-raid briefing. 4 people, 1 table, 1 truth coming into focus. Nina placed a thick file in front of me. "We've secured a court order." I looked up. "That fast?" "Elias prepared the file the moment Eleanor hired him," Nina replied. "And with the toxicology evidence, the video of Sabrina purchasing substances, and the threat photographs, the court expedited it due to imminent danger to life." She opened the folder and pointed to 2 bolded lines: authorization to install covert audio and video surveillance inside the residence of Tom Calder, authorization for financial monitoring, suspected fraud, poisoning, conspiracy to commit murder. I stared at the words and heard Eleanor's voice in my memory, weak but firm. "Never sign anything without reading it carefully, Tom. I worry about you." This time I read every word, and I understood. This was no longer a suspicion. This was a hunt. Nina continued, "We need to install cameras, microphones, and additional sensors in your house. But Nathan and Sabrina cannot be present when the technicians go in." Elias cut in, voice thickened. "Which means we need you to lure them out." "Lure?" I repeated. Elias nodded. "Give them a reason to leave the house for at least 45 minutes, and it has to fit your emotional state right now." Nina folded her hands and looked directly at me, as if reading my thoughts. "You must play the role of a completely broken father. Apologize for doubting them. Apologize for not signing sooner. And most importantly, agree to sign tomorrow." I asked quietly, "Why not arrest them now?" Nina answered instantly, "Because the court needs an active criminal act. We must catch them in the act of poisoning something you are about to consume." "Coffee," Elias added. "They favor coffee. Sabrina supplies the vial. Nathan adds the powder. It's subtle, but they will repeat it. Debt pressure will force them to make the same mistake." My chest tightened the way it had the first time I heard live ammunition crack overhead. Nina slid over a sheet with bullet points. 1. When you return home, appear weak, red-eyed, exhausted. 2. Apologize for suspecting Nathan and Sabrina. 3. Say Eleanor handled everything and you are overwhelmed. 4. Agree to sign the following morning. 5. Suggest a memorial dinner for Eleanor. Rosemary, wine from your anniversary. Items only available at Bellevue Gourmet Market. I immediately pictured the drive from my house to Bellevue, at least 40 minutes each way. Enough time. Elias said, "When they leave, our team will already be staged in a service van. Investigators will enter under court order and install cameras in the kitchen vent hood, the microwave clock, housing, the smoke detector, and a microphone in the chair you usually sit in." Nina nodded. "You cannot signal anything. One wrong glance, and they will sense it." I thought of Nathan as a child, how he could read my eyes before I threw a ball, knew the pitch before it left my hand. Now I had to make him believe I had surrendered. Nina took a breath and spoke more slowly. Mr. Calder, you served in the military. You know what a suicide mission looks like. I looked out through the large glass wall on the 28th floor. Seattle under rain. Lights stretched like glowing veins. A massive city, but the pain and betrayal lived in my kitchen. Elias stood and rested a hand on the back of my chair. If you do this, we catch them while they poison your coffee. No denials possible. Grant Holloway, silent until now, spoke, voice rough and sincere. Eleanor fought alone for too long. Now it's your turn, Tom. I looked at the three of them, a lawyer, a detective, a chief executive officer. None of them was my family. Yet, they trusted me more than the people who shared my blood. I drew a deep breath, not the breath of a 64-year-old man, but of someone who had stood at the edge of life and death and knew no one would save him if he stepped wrong. I stood. I understand, Nina asked. Are you certain? Once you go home, you face them alone. We will only hear through the cameras. No one can intervene in time if I cut her off. I understand. I looked at the file, at Eleanor's photograph on Grant's desk, and for the first time since the funeral, my heart steadied. I carried out many missions in uniform, but this, I closed my hand into a fist. This is the final mission of a husband. Elias nodded, satisfied. Then we begin. And I knew that tonight, when I stepped back into that house under the Seattle rain, I would not be returning as a widower. I would be returning as a soldier on his last mission. No mistakes, no hesitation, no dying, not yet, because this battle was for Eleanor to live again through the truth, and to ensure the two people I once called my children would never harm anyone again. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist, focused on revenge stories for an American audience, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. Seattle at night was cold as steel when I reached the front door, and before my hand even touched the knob, the door flew open hard enough to startle the wind itself. Nathan stood blocking the doorway, eyes sharp as a blade, and his first words were thrown straight at me like a punch. Where the hell have you been, old man? The way he stressed old man was not accidental, but a carefully sharpened contempt. Before I could answer, Sabrina appeared behind him, arms crossed, lips curved into a paper-thin smile. We almost called the police to report a missing person, you know. Missing because of senility. Exactly what you'd expect from a confused old ex-soldier who can't even find his way home. The two of them stood there, humiliating me inside the very house I had built, and I knew that if I wanted to live, I had to perform. I let my shoulders slump heavily, drained my eyes of focus, and let my voice tremble slightly. I got lost. I just wanted to go to the Veterans Park to sit near the names of some old friends. Sabrina shot Nathan a triumphant look, as if to say, "See, he really is finished," while Nathan shook his head and stepped aside to let me in. But his next words were the second knife. "You embarrassed us in front of the neighbors. Let's hope tomorrow you're clear-headed enough to sign." I walked into the living room, forcing my legs not to shake as I remembered Nina and Elias's instructions. Break completely. I sank into the chair, covered my face with one hand, and spoke in a broken voice. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm not strong like I used to be. Tomorrow I'll sign. I just want one last dinner to remember Eleanor. One dinner, like a family." Nathan and Sabrina exchanged a glance, their irritation dissolving into crude satisfaction at seeing the prey submit. I went on, "Sabrina, make the rosemary chicken Eleanor loved, and the wine, the anniversary bottle, the one only the Bellevue Market carries. Then tomorrow morning, Nathan can make me my last cup of coffee." When I said, "last cup of coffee," Sabrina froze for a single second, her eyes flashing with a guilty light that even a heartless person couldn't fully hide. But then she smiled, sweet to the point of being fake. "Of course, Dad. We'll take care of everything." Nathan glanced at his watch and grabbed his jacket. Let's go. It's late, but we can still make it. They thought I was soft as wax. They thought I was ready to sign, ready to die. I lowered my head so they wouldn't see my real eyes, the eyes of a soldier preparing to enter battle once more. When their car pulled out of the driveway, I stepped to the window, my heart beating slow and steady, just like it used to under a loaded pack. 2 blocks away, the lights of a cable van blinked once, a brief signal from Elias. The tech team was in position. The house was about to become an ambush site, and I, the old man they had just insulted, would be the one leading them straight into the trap. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist focused on revenge stories for an American audience, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph, with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. Seattle did not sleep that night, but I was the one awake in a different kind of darkness, the darkness of people who know that tomorrow might be the last day of their life. Inside the brightly lit Bellevue Market, cold like a sterile stage, I deliberately moved slower than any tired old man needed to move. I picked up a bottle of Cabernet, then asked a clerk about a Merlot I knew for a fact the store did not carry. I held a sprig of rosemary, smelled it, shook my head, swapped it for another, then went back to the first spot again, an endless loop of staged confusion. Nathan stood with his arms crossed, irritation obvious in the tight grind of his jaw, while Sabrina kept checking her watch, fingers tapping impatiently against the shopping cart. I could feel their impatience clearly, a sign that the time I was stretching was starting to work. When I stopped at the wine counter for the 3rd time, the phone in my pocket vibrated once, short and sharp. "We're in." Elias did not need to say more. Instantly, a 3-dimensional map of my house unfolded in my mind. The basement window, the perfect blind spot, the old wooden frame, unlikely to trigger intrusion sensors, and the strategic positions where the tech team was, installing devices under court order. I could almost see them in my imagination. 2 slipping through the basement window whose hinges I had replaced myself, another climbing onto a chair to remove the smoke detector cover, hiding a camera inside like a cold eye, someone else fitting a tiny device into the wall clock. One small twist, and both battery and camera were sealed inside the wood. Even the microwave, with its blue digital clock, now carried another invisible light, the light of surveillance. Above the dining room, the crystal chandelier I used to clean every Christmas now held a directional microphone, capturing every breath, every knife tap on the cutting board, every word that could condemn the 2 people I had raised. When we returned home, everything looked exactly as it had when we left. The sofa straight, the tablecloth undisturbed, no sign anyone had been inside. But I knew. The house felt different. It was a cage, and I had just led 2 predators inside without them realizing the door had locked behind them. That night, while the chicken marinated and Sabrina busied herself in the kitchen, Nathan and she argued upstairs with the bedroom door half open. I sat in the living room darkness like a ghost left over from a previous life. Elias had warned me, do not react. The cameras and microphones need reality. So I sat still, listening as every word fell like a slab of stone. Sabrina snapped, "Oh, we're about to have $8 million. What more do you want?" Nathan almost roared back, "What do I want? I want this over faster. I want the old bastard to sign already. Do you know how much I owe? $8 million. Do you know those people won't let me live another week?" I heard something hit the floor as Sabrina threw it. "We're almost there. Just don't screw it up." Then Nathan, with a laugh that was half insane and half desperate, said the line that froze my heart colder than snow on Mount Rainier. "He's just a walking pension check, a walking corpse. I don't know why you're so stressed about this." A walking corpse. A father, a veteran, Eleanor's husband. A corpse. That insult hit me like a rifle butt. Not enough to kill, but enough to remind me that the attacker no longer saw me as human. I sat in the darkness, hands clenched together until my knuckles cracked. In all my years of service, I had heard insults from enemies, but hearing it from my own son was a wound of an entirely different kind. When the night finally sank into silence, the whole house felt wrapped in ice. I did not sleep. I could not sleep. I sat in the dark until the microwave clock glowed 2:57 in the morning. I whispered, my voice splintered like a final oath. "Tomorrow, Eleanor?" And I knew that would be the day the truth began to speak. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist, focused on revenge stories for an American audience, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. Seattle's early morning cold was sharp enough that my breath dissolved like smoke, and under the dull gray sky, my kitchen looked more like a firing range than a place where a family once ate breakfast. I walked in with my shoulders deliberately slumped, as if about to collapse, my voice trembling exactly like an old man waking after a sleepless night. "Nathan, I want a cup of coffee the way your mother used to make it." I said it as though I were begging for the smallest thing left in my life. And Nathan did not hide the flash of malice that crossed his eyes, standing up immediately, too quickly to conceal his eagerness. Sabrina opened the upper cabinet and reached for a small brown glass jar, the very one Elias had warned me to watch for. And she shook it lightly, before saying in a voice so sweet it almost sounded unreal, "Don't forget his vitamins." Those 2 words, his vitamins dropping from her mouth like a cruel joke. Only someone about to kill her father could find amusing. The camera in the smoke detector captured everything, perfectly framing the moment Nathan opened the lid, tilted his hand, and tap, tap, tap. The white powder fell into the coffee maker's water reservoir, a sound that to me rang like a round being chambered. Sabrina stood beside him, smiling with her mouth, while her eyes stayed cold, Nathan stirring the water with a long spoon, slow, steady, and emotionless. The coffee machine began to roar, hot water flowing through the poison and dissolving every trace. My hand genuinely shook when Nathan set the cup in front of me, the coffee steaming like a heated grave. I reached for it, let my fingers tremble harder than before, then let go. The cup shattered across the table, black liquid spilling like blood, splashing hot against my pants. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy," I stammered exactly like a truly panicked old man, watching the poisoned coffee spread across the floor. Nathan's face darkened for a single beat, the camera recorded clearly, while Sabrina's lips pressed together until they went pale. $8 million lay wasted in a puddle of coffee. Nathan inhaled deeply, forcing down his rage, and when I whispered, "I'm still cold. I need another cup. Can you make me one?" He swallowed the bait completely. Nathan grabbed a fresh cup and repeated the process, this time faster, rougher, and so obvious it could not be denied. Jar opened, hand tilted, tap, tap, tap. Powder pouring in a steady stream without hesitation. Sabrina stood beside him and nodded, like issuing an order. The coffee machine screamed to life again, a sound like a countdown ticking away. I stared at the second poisoned cup placed in front of me without touching it. 3 seconds later, through the microphone hidden in the chandelier, Elias's voice cut through the air, cold as a blade drawn from its sheath. "Go." And in that same instant the world exploded. Bam! The front door was blown open. Bam! The back door shattered as if hit by breaching charges. Police voices thundered, "Seattle PD! Don't move!" The house shaking like a battlefield for my days in uniform. Sabrina screamed. Nathan spun around, face drained white, eyes wide as if staring at the end of his own life. And I, the old soldier seated in the middle of the kitchen, simply placed my hand on the table and let out one long breath. The battle had begun. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist focused on American revenge stories, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. That morning, Seattle was no longer the rain-soaked city I had known, but felt like a battlefield just shaken awake. Cold, loud, the metallic smell of guns and legal procedure mixing with the scent of coffee still hanging unfinished in the air. Police flooded my kitchen like a raid rehearsed dozens of times, except this time the person being cuffed was not a stranger, but my own son. Nathan jerked violently, and his first instinct was not to ask what was happening, but to run, bolting for the back door, the legs that once raced across the front yard as a child now scrambling across the wooden floor like a trapped animal, making it only a few steps before 3 officers slammed him down, face pressed to the cold tile as the handcuffs snapped shut with a dry metallic click, a sound no different from a coffin lid. Sealing, final, and impossible to reopen. Sabrina did not run, freezing for a few seconds before her mind chose the most cowardly and predictable path, screaming until her voice tore, sobbing as she lunged toward the officers and pointed straight at Nathan, shouting that he made her do it, that it was all him, that Nathan forced her, twisting every word of "forced me" like a frayed rope meant to strangle someone else, while hoping anyone would believe she was the one hanging. But this kitchen was no longer just 4 wooden walls. It was a sealed box, full of eyes and ears. Every word she screamed, every sideways glance she shot Nathan, every cold smile from the past days already swallowed into the memory of cameras hidden in smoke detectors, wall clocks, and the microwave display, leaving no space left for theater. Elias entered last, quiet and unhurried, not the type to tackle suspects, but the kind who collects the spoils after the fight. Black leather jacket, cold eyes, footsteps steady as machinery, ignoring Nathan pinned to the floor and Sabrina unraveling with mascara, streaked like a bad performance. Walking straight to the table where the second cup of coffee still steamed, pulling on latex gloves and lifting the cup with 2 fingers, as if holding a heart torn from a killer's chest before sliding it into a clear evidence bag, sealing it, labeling it, numbering it, signing his name, every motion following chain of custody protocol, the unbroken path from scene to courtroom no dirty lawyer could shatter. Then he opened the cabinet and retrieved the glass jar Sabrina used, white residue still clinging to the rim, placing it into another bag, sealing and signing without the slightest tremor, those 2 small objects, a cup of coffee and a jar, amounting to 2 death sentences for Nathan and Sabrina. When the house was finally wrapped in yellow tape reading, "Crime scene do not cross," I stood outside like a man exiled from his own life, Grant Holloway arriving to rest a hand on my shoulder before taking me to a luxury hotel downtown, the kind with polished stone floors, carpets thick enough to swallow footsteps, and staff whose smiles are identical, a place Eleanor once dreamed of staying, to drink tea by the window and watch the city, while I sat in a leather chair in a suite twice the size of my house, feeling none of its luxury, only the hollowness of a temporary shelter, after a helicopter extraction, smoke, and bodies left behind. That afternoon, Nina Ramirez arrived, walking in with the posture of someone carrying entire verdicts in her briefcase. Navy suit, immaculate, hair pulled tight, eyes straight, words never wasted. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist, focused on American revenge stories, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. "Tom," she said, pulling a chair to sit across from me and setting the file on the table like dropping a stone onto a lake struggling to stay still. "The test results on the coffee from this morning are back." I looked at her without blinking as Nina opened the folder, flipped to the marked page, her voice steady but with a tightly compressed fury underneath. "The coffee Nathan prepared for you this morning contained arsenic and warfarin at an acute level, not the small cumulative doses used on Eleanor. At this concentration you would have collapsed within 3 to 5 minutes after drinking it. there would have been no time for an ambulance and no chance of survival. 3 to 5 minutes, a span of time I once used to load a magazine, change position, catch my breath, a span long enough to send a message, kiss someone goodbye, or even argue one last time. But in Nathan and Sabrina's plan, those 3 to 5 minutes were nothing more than a buffer before I stopped being a problem, Nina continued, slower now and heavier. And there is something else, more important. We found this in the apartment, above the garage. She took out a stack of photocopied pages, clipped neatly together, and slid them toward me. The first line bold, clean, precise. I confess I killed my wife, I read on, my eyes moving while my heart felt like it was being gripped and crushed with every beat. I, Thomas Calder, confess that I killed my wife. Eleanor, I could not stand the way she changed, no longer the woman I loved. I used her medication, increasing the dosage, to end it all. Now guilt consumes me. I have poisoned myself with the same substance in my coffee. When I am found, please believe that my son, Nathan Calder, is innocent. I leave all assets, property, and insurance money to him. Every line on that page was not just a lie. It was a gunshot aimed straight at my name, my honor, and the memory of Eleanor herself. They were not only planning to kill me, they had prepared an entire story to tell the world, after I was gone. The jealous old soldier who killed his wife, repented, committed suicide, and left everything to his poor, innocent son. Nina removed her glasses and looked at me, her voice now not just that of a lawyer, but of someone who has witnessed too much human filth. Tom, if you had drunk that coffee, if you had died this morning at your kitchen table, the police would have found this letter on the desk or in a drawer. The story would have closed perfectly. Eleanor poisoned, you dead from the same toxin, and the confession all from your own hand. The hotel room suddenly felt smaller, not because the walls moved, but because it felt like concrete was being poured around me layer by layer. Nathan did not just want me gone. He wanted me buried under the name wife killer. He wanted Eleanor, a woman who lived upright and clean, down to every number in a ledger, turned into the victim of a jealous, deranged, and cruel husband. He wanted the world to pity him, hate me, and see Eleanor through the warped lens he himself created. They wanted to kill me and then kill my memory, and kill Eleanor's image one more time. I set the fake confession down on the table, the way one sets a filthy weapon onto the floor, my hands shaking not from age and not from the poison I had unknowingly ingested for months, but from the realization that the son I raised, taught to stand straight, and gave the Calder name to had calmly sat somewhere typing the words, I, Thomas Calder, confess that I killed my wife. Without ever feeling his hands were dirty, I looked up through the large window of the suite. Seattle was still raining, cars still moved, people still went to work, drank coffee, lived their ordinary days, unaware that if Nathan and Sabrina's plan had succeeded, a headline would have appeared somewhere that morning. Veteran kills wife then himself. Son inherits in grief. And people would have believed it because the world always believes stories that are neatly packaged. But they made one single mistake. The mistake in war known as overconfidence. They thought I would drink. They thought I would die. They thought no one would read the signs Eleanor left behind. No one would listen to Marissa's warning. No one would notice the numbers in the accounts. No one would question the vitamins in the glass jar. They thought I was just a walking pension check. Living corpse. I said nothing to Nina for several minutes, only feeling my heartbeat settle back into its old rhythm. The rhythm of a soldier regaining clarity after the first shock. And very slowly I said, my voice hoarse but clear, they did not just want to kill me, Nina. They wanted to kill me in the eyes of everyone, and kill Eleanor all over again. Nina nodded, her gaze sharp as a blade set in the right place. Yes, but they failed. I looked down at the fake confession one last time, and in that exact moment, I knew that from now on this was no longer the story of an old man protecting his own life. It was a war to reclaim Eleanor's name, and I, the man they believed had no value left, would be the one to drag the truth into the light and make it stand there. I confirm my role as an American English translation specialist focused on American revenge stories, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. In the days after the raid, Seattle carried an unusual silence, not the calm kind, but the hush that comes before a heavy sentence is handed down. I sat in the hotel suite, looking out over the streets where hundreds of people continued living their lives, unaware that just a few floors above them, a horrifying truth was being assembled, piece by cold piece. Nina Ramirez arrived at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, with a file as thick as a criminal diary tucked under her arm, setting it on the glass table and opening it page by page as if peeling back layers of betrayal. "Tom," she began, her voice sharp and even with not a drop of unnecessary pity, "this is their motive." She showed me financial statements, numbers marching down the pages like bullets fired straight into what little trust I had left. Over the past 5 years, Nathan had been withdrawing money from my accounts steadily and systematically. Small amounts at first, 5,000, 10,000, then gradually increasing to 50,000. A clear and deliberate pattern, a son I once taught to calculate now using that skill to calculate me. Nina pointed to the summary page. "The total amount Nathan took from you is $800,000. I drew in a cold breath, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. She turned to the next page, a long list of hidden debts, illegal casinos, offshore sports betting, several well-known loan sharks in Tacoma and Kent. The final number printed in bold. $8 million? I nearly had to brace myself on the table to stay upright. $8 million. A pit so deep no one climbs out of it unless someone else dies, Nina continued. Eleanor noticed the financial shortfall on your side first. Then she saw Nathan's withdrawals. She did not want to worry you, so she investigated on her own, and eventually she went to Grant Holloway. My chest tightened. Eleanor, even in her final days, had been protecting me quietly the way she always had, and for that she was silenced forever. Nina tightened her grip on her pen and lowered her voice. Eleanor suspected poisoning. She requested toxicology tests, but Nathan convinced the doctor to dismiss it. I closed my eyes. Marissa had tried to warn me. I ignored it, and Eleanor died at the hands of the very son she believed she had raised right. But justice, even when late, still arrives. We obtained an exhumation order, Nina went on, and the supplemental autopsy confirms Eleanor was chronically poisoned with arsenic and warfarin for at least 8 to 12 months. I heard Nina's pen tapping the table, steady and light, yet each tap drove into me, a little every day, very little, enough to weaken the body, enough to manufacture a natural death that was not murder, it was cultivating a death. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, a familiar script of accomplices was playing out. Nathan blaming everything on Sabrina, Sabrina sobbing and blaming everything on Nathan, 2 trapped animals tearing at each other to survive. The cameras captured everything. Elias watched from outside and relayed every word to Nina. There was no escape left. By afternoon, there was a gentle knock at my door, careful and hesitant, as if afraid to startle me. Marissa Colborne stepped in, her nurse's uniform making her look smaller and more fragile than the courage she truly carried. She placed her hands on the table, eyes red. "Mr. Calder, I am sorry. Eleanor knew something was wrong, she told me. If I don't make it, tell Tom." I tried, but Nathan was always there. Her voice broke. "I wish I had done more." I placed my hand lightly over hers, a gesture I rarely made anymore because of age, but that day I wanted her to know Eleanor did not blame her, The only person Eleanor blamed might have been me for not seeing what she saw. When Marissa left, Nina turned to me. Tom, now it is your decision. We have evidence, motive, statements, the fake letter, and toxicology results. She looked straight at me without flinching. But the jury needs to hear from you. They need to know what happened in that kitchen. They need to hear you describe how Nathan poisoned you, and they need to see that you are still alive. I looked out the window where Seattle was still raining, but it was no longer the sorrowful rain of the day Eleanor died. This was a cleansing rain, a rain preparing the way for truth to step into the light. I stood up slowly, no longer with the posture of a trembling old man playing the victim, but with the stance of the last soldier of the Calder family. I nodded. I will go to court. I will speak for Eleanor. And I understood that walking into the courtroom was not a duty. It was an oath, the final oath of a husband, a soldier, and a man who had lost everything except the truth. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist focused on American revenge, stories, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. King County Superior Court that morning was packed like a theater, waiting for the bloodiest tragedy to begin. People pressed in to find seats. Press? Neighbors who had once offered condolences. Strangers who came only to see with their own eyes the two people who poisoned their own family. The air thick and heavy like the smell of old wood soaked with rain, the kind of smell that signals something is about to rot forever. I entered the courtroom with the assistance of a court officer, though I did not truly need it. I could walk on my own, and I wanted Nathan to see that. Nathan sat at the table on the left, wearing a wrinkled borrowed jail suit, collar crooked, his eyes sharp and black like a blade. That look was no longer anger, but hatred, deep, dense, and desperate. The kind of look that belongs to someone who has lost everything and still wants to drag someone else down with him. Sabrina sat at the other defendant's table, her hands shaking, lips pale. Not from remorse, but from fear that Nathan would speak before she could build a story against him. When I raised my hand to swear the oath, Nathan did not take his eyes off me for even a second. If looks could kill, I would have collapsed on the witness stand right then. His attorney, a salt-and-pepper-haired man with a velvet soft voice, the kind who defends clients who have nothing left to defend, stepped forward and began his performance, asking whether I was 70. I corrected him and said 64. He asked about post-traumatic stress from military service. I said no. He smiled as if I had answered wrong on purpose, then asked whether I had hallucinations, confusion, senility from age. I looked straight at the jury, 12 people trying to decide whether I was a lucid old soldier or a confused old man, misunderstood by his children. And I said slowly and clearly that in the past the enemy I faced wore a different uniform, and today the enemy carried the Calder name. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lawyer stiffened as if struck. I told everything exactly as it happened without adding a drop of color. From the first cup of coffee to the tap, tap, tap of the poison powder. From Sabrina's words, "Don't forget his vitamins," to the moment Nathan repeated the act of murder a second time. From fear to the decision to play a broken old man to trap my own son. Then the prosecutor stood and requested to show Exhibit 47. The lights dimmed. The screen came alive. Video from the smoke detector camera sharp down to every blink. Nathan tipping the vial. Tap, tap, tap. Sabrina beside him smiling with her arms folded as if watching someone mix a cocktail for a dinner party. Nathan stirring the water reservoir, pouring the cup, handing it toward me, unaware he was being recorded. No one in the courtroom breathed or moved. People witnessed pure evil with no exaggeration, no theater, no blood, just a son making coffee to kill his father. A reporter dropped a pen. A woman covered her mouth to keep from crying. A juror turned away. When the video ended, the air felt like wet cement. Then just when I thought Sabrina would keep that brittle composure, she suddenly exploded, leaping up and gripping the table, screaming in a voice shredded and sharp as broken glass that he said it would only take a few minutes, and that he told her not to worry. The words fell into the courtroom like a bomb. No one stopped her in time. 2 security officers rushed to restrain her. But it was too late. The confession had come out raw and irreversible. Nathan turned to her, and his expression shifted from rage to terror. He knew the fatal blow had not come from me, but from his own accomplice. The judge pounded the gavel, calling for order, but the truth had already detonated and could not be pulled back. The jury left the room and returned in exactly 29 minutes. The foreperson looked straight at the judge and read the verdict clearly, word by word, like knives driven into the table. Guilty on all counts. Nathan closed his eyes. Sabrina collapsed back into her chair, and I, for the first time in many months, felt Eleanor standing somewhere in the dim light of the courtroom, smiling. I confirmed my role as an American English translation specialist focused on American revenge stories, and I will translate faithfully without adding or omitting, presented as a single paragraph with no line breaks, with all numbers written out in words. A faint smile, the smile of someone who understands that every door has closed and that ahead lies only darkness behind a steel door. He turned away, and that was the last moment I saw my son, a shadow swallowed by the prison door with no way back. A few weeks later, the court handed down the sentence. Nathan was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, deliberate poisoning, and aggravated financial fraud, sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of early parole, along with the forfeiture of all related assets. Sabrina was convicted as an accomplice of concealing the crime and participating in the poisoning, sentenced to 25 years in prison. There were no more arguments, no alternative narratives, only files closed with red stamps and cold numbers. When I returned to the wooden house overlooking Elliott Bay, I had to stop for a few seconds before opening the door. That house once held Eleanor's footsteps, the sound of a metal spoon tapping a pan, her soft laugh whenever she called me old soldier. Now there was only the wind, no scent of the apple pie she used to bake, no warm yellow kitchen light, only the house, empty, silent, and so clean it felt as if no one had ever lived there. Marissa Colborne stopped by that afternoon, bringing a bundle of white flowers, the kind Eleanor loved, and set them on the walnut table. "I think Eleanor would want you to have these," Marissa said, her voice gentle but not weak. "She always said you were someone who saw deeper than people thought." I knew Marissa still carried guilt, so I only shook my head. "You did more than you think. Eleanor trusted you." And for me that was enough to close what could not be saved. Shortly after, Grant Holloway came by. He stood at the door with his hands in the pockets of his long coat, looking a few years older than when he first brought the news. "Tom, if you want, I can have people renovate this place. New paint, new doors, new floors, so you don't have to live among bad memories." I looked at him, then at the house I had built from wood, nails, and a lifetime of hope. "Grant," I said, "the good memories outweigh the bad ones. I don't want to erase them." Grant nodded. He understood what emptiness looks like, and when he left, the house returned to silence. I walked to the corner of the living room where Eleanor used to keep her small notebook. She wrote very lightly, very evenly, as if afraid even words might carry enough weight to break something. I opened the last page. There was only one line, the handwriting slightly shaky as if written when strength was fading, but will remain intact. "If something happens to me, trust your instincts, Tom." I stood still. The wind outside stirred the curtains gently, and in that moment I felt as if I could hear Eleanor's breath somewhere in the room. Not reproachful, not sad, just the calm presence of someone who had loved me her entire life. I stood by the window, watching Seattle sink into the last rain of the day, rain falling on the roof, on the railing, on the narrow road leading to Elliott Bay, and I understood that I was still alive, not by luck, not by coincidence. I was still alive because Eleanor had never let go of me, even when she left this world, an old soldier surviving the final battle, not against an enemy in uniform, but against evil wearing his own name. I whispered to my reflection in the glass, Eleanor, I'm home. And for the first time in many months, I felt at peace. If my story makes someone out there look again at dangerous signs, murky secrets, or people they believed could never commit cruelty, then Eleanor has saved one more life. If you feel this story touched you with truth, with pain, or with the anger reserved for those who betray their own family, leave the name of your city below so I know where you are. Follow along so we can meet again. Thank you for walking with me all the way to the final page of this story. I am grateful.